Hi. Um, so I guess we should start the debate. So after death, there is nothing. I believe in this. I believe that the mind is inseparable from the body. And so people who don't believe this, who believe that there's something after death, they fall into a few categories. And one of them is to say that we can continue to exist spiritually after we die. Now, my problem with this is that there are people, everything that our experience shows us suggests that we cannot exist separately from our bodies. For example, people with Alzheimer's or with head trauma suffer things like memory loss or even changes in personality due to the effect on their body. So I don't see how if they continue to exist after death, would they still be, for example, have brain damage, or what would happen to them? Other theories for what could happen after death are things like the body being reconstituted after death, which there's no evidence for that, or reincarnation. I don't believe there's evidence for that either. So again, just to sum up, everything suggests that even like if I close my eyes, I can't see. All of that is related to the body, and without a body, it's unclear how we would have those experiences. And to say that we still would have those experiences suggests that the body is somehow superfluous, which I don't think anyone would agree with.
George Washington says in Hamilton the musical, you have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story. Because I agree with this statement, I negate the resolution, after death there is nothing. Observation 1, definition. Definition 1, death, a cessation of all vital functions. 2, nothing, not anything, 0 physical or non-physical existence. Observation 2, burdens. The affirmative's burden is to prove that after death there is nothing. The negative's burden is to prove that at least one thing exists after death. I have 3 contentions that I'll briefly lay out and expand as necessary as the round progresses. Contention 1, life after death. There are many religions today that believe in an afterlife. For this debate, we will not debate which religion is correct. As the round goes on, I will show many studies and examples done around the world that shows that consciousness exists after death. Contention 2, energy lives on. The basis of this contention comes from a quote from Albert Einstein, that energy cannot be created or destroyed in the theory of the conservation of energy. This shows that our energy lives on through other things. Contention 3, legacy or memory. The basis of this contention is that even if you don't buy the physical existence of life after death, there's no denying that legacy, the one leaves behind after death. From presidents to public figures, everyone that walks this earth leaves a positive or negative impact, and we even have holidays in today's culture that celebrate the impacts that these people have made. Looking at his case and his contentions, he doesn't give any definitions or burdens, so mine are going to stand right now in this debate. The first one he gives is that would exist through spirituality, and he brings up the Alzheimer's argument and the dementia argument, and he says that if they had this now, how do we know that they wouldn't have it in an afterlife or in this scenario? First off, we're going to look at the fact that Alzheimer's and dementia isn't at the beginning of the life. It's usually towards the end, so they didn't have it at one time. And then we'll talk about his other stuff as I continue in the round. But based on this, I see no other vote but negating the resolution.
Okay. Well, you mentioned, for example, energy, the fact that energy can't be created or destroyed. That's not really part of this debate. I mean, yeah, energy can be created or destroyed, but death certainly happens. I mean, it's just a change in energy. It's like when our body reaches equilibrium. So energy is not destroyed in that, but we continue to die. The other thing you mentioned is, I think, legacy continues to live on. Well, yeah, that's kind of obvious that, for example, after people die, their memories and so on continue to live. But again, I don't see how that's related to this debate, which is how a person's consciousness can continue to exist after death. So Right now, I don't feel like I have had any negations of my arguments, so I
He cut out there for me a little at the end, but I think he said he doesn't have any negations, and so he backed out. So we're going to get right back into his case specifically. One, I did talk about how the Alzheimer's is existent in the beginning of it, so I don't see how it couldn't carry on at the end. Like, my grandfather had Alzheimer's, and he didn't actually develop that until his late stages. So if he didn't have it before and then he had it, was to say that that's not going to exist after. That doesn't go really touched about, but I want to mention an article here specifically from CNN by Ben Brumfield that talks about 200 cases that they did of people that had they actually were killed and then brought back to life. And in all 200 of those, their consciousness actually continues for 3 to 5 minutes after the heart starts beating, which shows that this does exist in people. There are 2 or 3 other cases that I can bring up later in the debate as specifically necessary. Then I want to go on to the fact that he said in his case itself that if you close your eyes, you do not see. Okay, so when you close your eyes, but you do not see, but the rest of your body still functions. So I don't see how that necessarily links into the debate. After death, the rest of your consciousness, which is what we're debating here, that still works when your eyes are closed. So I don't see specifically how that links into this specific scenario. So going back to my case to rebuild and talk about some of his things, on the contention 1, the life after death, I just showed you a case study of 200 people that had consciousness afterwards. Second, the energy lives on. If you go back to my definitions at the beginning, I specifically defined, which goes, he does not touch nothing as anything physical or non-physical. So if I showed that our body, which is made up of 95 or 80% energy, kinetic, passive, all kinds of different energy, cannot be destroyed. Once we die, our energy goes somewhere and continues to live on. And then 2, the third contention of the legacy, again, he says just no link. But when you look back to my definitions of nothing being physical or non-physical of nature, you see that the legacy and the things that we create here actually live on after we die. So after death, there is not nothing, there still is something.
Okay. Well, there definitely is something after death. I don't deny, obviously after death, for example, there's our corpse, there are lots of things after death, we decompose and so on. Legacy, yes. Okay. Our legacy, but I don't see those to be really related to after death. I just see them as near death. So these things can happen, and it's been shown, I believe, that after, when a person is dying and the brain is losing oxygen, they experience hallucinations, which cannot be shown to have any relation to the afterlife. So yeah, that's it for now.
Okay, so we're specifically going to look at 2 main things that happened in his last speech that are viable to this debate. The first is that he does concede that there is something after death. He says that, yes, he cannot argue that a legacy lives on. You're going to look to my burden at the very beginning of the debate and my definitions. When you see these 2 things, you see that I've already won this specific debate. In my definitions, I specifically define nothing as not anything, 0 physical or non-physical exists. He does not touch this or our counter definition. Then you look to my burdens. I said that the negative burden is to prove at least one thing exists after death. In his last speech, he specifically said not only is a legacy, but he brought up his own contention that says a corpse is there after death. I wasn't even going that route, but when you look to the burden that he has not touched that I laid out at the beginning of my speech, you see that now I have won 2 contentions that show something exists after death, and I have negated successfully the resolution. Speaking back to his topic so we can continue the clash of this debate, he said that the hallucinations are happening and that's things that could happen after death. I want to go to another article that I specifically has here on from theafterlifecoach.com that specifically says that the study followed the brain activity and experiences of 200 people that essentially died but did indeed continue consciousness. And it says that when they came back from the dead, their description of their hallucinations, as he said, was almost word for word the exact same. It's not a coincidence that only one thing happens and it's different. It's the same for all of these different people. They're experiencing the same hallucinations. They're experiencing the same. This is from a cited source that specifically actually shows a study of 200 people that's different from the one that I quoted earlier. So when we look to these two studies, we see that the contention one of life after death is not a coincidence. Our consciousness lives on, even if it's a hallucination. That's showing something. The energy he doesn't touch in the last round, and the legacy and the memory he concedes. Therefore, there is no vote at the end of this debate but for negative.
Okay, well, I guess we just have different interpretations of what the question is. I mean, obviously, okay, no reasonable, really no one would say that, oh, just because one person dies, then of course the whole universe doesn't cease to exist. So if we want to argue about that, then that's just not a very substantive debate. And by taking this question too literally, kind of sidestep the more interesting question of whether consciousness exists. Now, you have talked about that as well. And you have mentioned that they can recall details of what happened after, I assume, cardiac arrest. And yeah, so I said hallucinations. Okay, some people experience hallucinations. Other people don't. They appear to continue to have, auditory or visual perceptions after cardiac arrest. So I don't, I don't consider that after death. I really consider it before death. So it's not really relevant in this situation. And energy, yeah, energy again, because after you die, your energy can go, in a bunch of different places. But I really want to talk about whether there's consciousness after death, and not just after cardiac arrest, but really like after attempts have been made to resuscitate. Like maybe a few minutes after cardiac arrest, people can still be conscious, but more than that, there's no evidence.
Okay, so gonna touch on the first. It goes back to the framework. It says that we had not come here to debate about the things that I've said. We only came here to debate about the consciousness. My three arguments on that. One is going to be how the wording of the specific resolution here. If they wanted us to debate on consciousness, it could say after death there is no consciousness. The specific wording of the resolution says nothing. I gave a definition for nothing. It goes cold conceded by the affirmative, and because he does not debate that, my definition sticks in this round. It says physical or non-physical existence. So we're going to again look to the second and third contentions, which he does not touch, and actually concedes that they are true and they do live on after that. He says this isn't fair because it's my own wording and that there's nothing proven. Again, go to the burdens and the definitions that weren't brought up at the beginning. But two, I gave a specific example of the Einstein's quote and the specific theory that was given about the energy not being broken up or killed. He could debate that theory. He could debate Einstein's theory. He could debate all these different things like people have done in the past. He refuses to touch this, so it stands on the flow of my second and third contention of energy still living on and legacy and the memory of people still living on is going to stand in today's debate. Back up to the first. He goes to the hallucinations and he says that they're auditory or this, and they're actually not considered after death. They're considered near death. Go back to the article and the study that I just wrote. It specifically says that, and we get into this specific situation, it specifically says in this article that these were 3 to 5 minutes after death and all heartbeats and all brain function had stopped and they still had record of consciousness after this happened. At the point where that happens, this is not near death. If you look back to the definition of death, it's a cessation of all vital organs that I defined that goes untouched, which shows those organs have stopped. And at that specific point, it is considered death. Therefore, again, no vote but for negative.
Okay. So if you consider death to be the cessation of brain and heart activity, then maybe you can say that, as I said, a few minutes after death, there might be still a chance to revive them, with medical equipment. So that's not really I don't really dispute that. So if you interpret the question like that, then yeah, there's still a chance to resuscitate a person a few minutes after cardiac arrest. So I do concede that. Legacy and memory and energy and the other things you discussed, I still consider them to be irrelevant because energy, like whether you're alive or dead, energy still exists. The what I'm interested is whether there's consciousness after death, and after death is, let's say after they've begun to decompose, can they be alive after that? So I would like to ask my opponent if he believes that, let's say after decomposition and things like that, can a person still come back to life or exist in some spiritual or physical form after that? Consciousness, not just the body.
Okay, so going over this, I'm going to give four main voters for this debate. First, he says, do I believe that consciousness or others can exist? Yes, and the reason I believe that is the studies that I provided that have shown that this is possible. I've given you two specific examples. I don't see a need for a third because there's been no refutation on that. So yes, I do believe that consciousness does exist after death, and I have proven that when all he's done is given specific personal refutation and not defeated the actual contentions or warrants of my round. So the four reasons you're going to vote con today is one, the framework. This framework goes untouched. I specifically lay definitions, and after I lay definitions, I lay burdens. The burdens was he has to prove nothing exists. I have to prove everything exists. He does not touch the framework of this debate. So therefore, that is the guidelines that we have. So when we look at that, we're going to look at two, the energy debate. He concedes that energy actually does exist after death. Our energy does get passed on. When you look to my definition of nothing and you look to my burdens, he has conceded that, therefore he's lost the round. Three, legacy. George Washington, perfect example. He's on our $1 bill. His legacy, the things he has done, lives on. Which brings me to my third little thing I want to bring out here. He says that they're irrelevant to the debate. Here's my problem with that. One, he doesn't get to pick the relevancy of the debate. I laid a framework and I laid definitions out. If he had a problem with that framework or if he had a problem with those definitions, that should have been brought up at the very beginning, not towards the end. At the point where he concedes the framework and concedes the definitions, he agrees on my definition of nothing and the burden that he has to prove that at least something exists. At the point where he does not provide that and concedes three of my arguments, his irrelevancy doesn't matter in this debate because that's not fair for me to him to set the parameters when he doesn't contradict mine. Because of this, there is no other vote at the end of the day but for con.
Okay, my opponent says that because he set the parameters, I don't just go with common sense and my own interpretation of what was meant by whoever wrote this debate over after death there is nothing. So just because my opponent takes the question very literally, meaning like after death there's really nothing, like the universe ceases to exist every time one person dies, I don't think that that is the correct way to interpret this question. At least it's not the interesting way. So legacy and memory, yeah, those exist. And regarding near-death experiences or after death, again, I'm talking about, like, let's say after decomposition, can someone continue to exist after decomposition? I didn't really get an answer about that. So I guess all that's left to say is that I believe that after death, after at least after a few minutes after death, there's no possibility for consciousness. So I ask the voters to vote according to whether they believe that or not, or if instead, if they consider that his interpretation of the question is more fruitful and more relevant, then by all means vote for my opponents.
I have 14 seconds. So again, the resolution does not say consciousness. It says nothing. We're going to go by framers' intent on that aspect. I laid the groundwork. He refused to debate the groundwork. Based on that, he does lose the debate based on the flow and the situation of the round.
Well, I don't have much else to say. Again, I just think that my opponent is taking the question too literally. And I continue to believe that after death, there is no possibility for consciousness. Again, I reiterate, it's because of there is no evidence that a mind can exist without a body. If the body is, has just ceased to function for just a few minutes, there's a possibility to bring it back. But after decomposition, etc., then I believe there is no possibility.